Okay.
Dear colleagues, my name is Urania Kouka, and I'm a prehistorian at the University of Cyprus. Together with Dr. Milena Gosic from the University of Belgrade, we welcome you all to the ARVA Archaeology in Action Lecture Series 2023. Tonight, we are very pleased to host the third talk of our Aegean and Southern Balkans lecture series. In this series, we have the honor to organize, thanks to the motivation of Dr. Marc Lebeau, the visionary and enthusiastic founder of the International Association for Archaeological Research in Western and Central Asia. We are hosting 8 lectures that are covering topics from the Paleolithic through the Iron Age. Topics of the above geographic areas are also being included in our peer-reviewed ARVA book series titled Aegean, Archaeology and History for the Aegean, Circum-Aegean and Southwestern Balkans that are published by Brepol's publishing house. This series offers an innovative podium for debating interregional and interdisciplinary approaches of past populations live in and around the Aegean basin, from the lower Paleolithic through the era of Alexander the Great. Aegean's editorial board welcomes monographs, publications of excavations, thematic volumes with theoretical and interdisciplinary methods and cultural heritage, proceeding of conferences, etc. Those interested in publishing with Aegean could contact Marc Lebeau and myself, who are the technical and scientific editors of the series, respectively. Tonight, I have the great pleasure to welcome our speaker, Associate Professor George Papasavvas, my good friend and colleague Yorgos from the Department of History and Archaeology of the University of Cyprus. Yorgos has received his BA at the University of Ioannina, continued his postgraduate studies at the University of Würzburg in Germany, and received his PhD at the University of Athens. His PhD thesis is titled Bronze Stands from Cyprus and Crete, Rod Tripods and Four-Sided Stands from the Late Bronze Age to the Early Iron Age, and was published in 2001. Yorgos has excavated at the sanctuary of Zeus at Dodona, at the settlement and cemetery of Xobourgo on Tinos Island in the Cyclades, and he is the co-excavator of the sanctuary of Hermes and Aphrodite at Syme Viannou in Crete, an excavation of the Archaeological Society at Athens under the direction of his major mentors, Angeliki Lebessi and Polymnia Mniouli. After having worked for 3 years for the Archaeological Service at the Ministry of Culture in Greece, Yorgos was elected in 2000 at the University of Cyprus, where since then he is teaching classical archaeology in undergraduate and postgraduate level. He has acted for many years as vice person and head of our department, and is the coordinator of the master's and doctoral program Archaeology in the Mediterranean from Prehistory to the Byzantine era, as well as of the interdepartmental master's program in conservation and restoration of historical buildings and sites. The research interests of our speaker include metalwork of the late Bronze and early Iron Ages in Cyprus and the Aegean, the relations between the Aegean and, and the Eastern Mediterranean in the late Bronze and early Iron Ages, ancient sanctuaries and cults on Crete and Cyprus, votive offerings, and ancient technology. Yorgos Papasavvas has participated in a number of programs, such as the multidisciplinary project for the analysis of metal artifacts from Cyprus from the Chalcolithic to the Roman era, and the European program People Narnia, New Archaeological Research Network for Integrating Approaches to Ancient Material Studies. Yorgos is the supervisor of PhDs and postdocs granted by the University of Cyprus, the Research and Innovation Foundation of Cyprus, and the European Union, and has co-organized national and international conferences in Cyprus. His publications include 2 monographs, 4 co-edited conference proceedings, and numerous peer-reviewed articles and chapters in books on bronze artifacts from Cyprus and the Aegean and on their technology, on the iconography of the ingots in the Eastern Mediterranean, on writing instruments from Crete and Cyprus, on the technology of Minoan gold signet rings, on votives from Cretan sanctuaries, on Iron Age terracottas from Cyprus, on the circulation and use of copper in the Mediterranean world, and on values, weights, and equivalents of metals in the late Bronze Age Eastern Mediterranean. In recent years, his work has focused on two sites, the sanctuary of Syme on Crete and Engomi on Cyprus. Yorgos Papasavvas is currently working on the final publication of the metal finds from the sanctuary of Hermes and Aphrodite at Syme, as well as on various projects designed to revisit the old excavations at Engomi with regard in particular to chronological and stratigraphic problems. For this reason, his research has recently expanded to the historiography of the discipline of archaeology and to archival research that has resulted his new book, just published, titled Trench Warfare at Engomi, Personalities, Politics, and Science in Cypriot Archaeology. The monograph he is currently working on is titled Syme, Volume 5, The Sanctuary of Hermes and Aphrodite at Syme Viannou, Crete, The Metal Finds, and will be published in the Syme series by the Archaeological Society at Athens. In tonight's lecture, Yorgos will present us the Sanctuary of Hermes and Aphrodite at Syme Viannou, Crete, the cult of a sacred couple and maturation rituals from the Minoan era to the Roman period. Dear Yorgo, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. The Archaeology in Action Online podium of ARVA is yours, and you can start sharing your screen.
Yes, let's do that first. Is it okay? Can you see it in full screen?
Yes, we can. Please go back to the first slide. Good.
Yeah.
We can see your first slide. Good, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Rania, for this introduction and for the invitation. Many thanks to you and Milena for this invitation. I'm very glad to be part of this very interesting and very informative initiative. It's great that to get a forum to present our research and work. So many thanks for this. And so also many thanks to all of you who are here and you are wishing to spend your late afternoon hearing about Cretan Sanctuary. Thank you very much. So let us start immediately. The Sanctuary of Hermes and Aphrodite in Syme Viannou on Crete is undeniably one of the most important sanctuaries of the Greek world. Excavations began in 1972 and continued until 2003 under the direction of Angeliki Lebessi and Polymnia-Mnouli. This presentation is in a way a joint effort as it owes much to their work. 7 volumes publishing various groups of finds have appeared in the homonymous series of the Archaeological Society at Athens, whereas at least 7 others are in various stages of preparation. This makes it, I think, one of the longest series of any Greek excavation project. Excavation and research of this project were greatly facilitated by grants from Instab. A long catalog of collaborators should be due here, but this will take too long. Suffice to say that all of the drawings that the architectural drawings you're going to see tonight are made by Nikos Zarifis, who is one of the people present in this Zoom meeting, and his monograph will appear very soon on the architecture of Syme. So the sanctuary is located in the province of Viannos, between central and eastern Crete, and close to the village of Syme. It was founded in the southern slopes of Mountain Dikte at an altitude of 1,130 meters, and in the center of a theater-like area opening to the south and to an outstanding view of the Libyan Sea. From the north and east, it is sheltered by steep wooded mountainsides. The imposing, rugged landscape with its dense vegetation, the wild goats that still climb on the rocks today, the open view to the sea, and the copious water from a nearby spring must have been taken early on as signs of the divine presence at the site and to have led to the establishment of the sanctuary. The sacred space occupied an area of 17,000 square meters, of which about 3,500 square meters have been excavated. Human activity at the site continued for about 27 centuries, from the beginning of the second millennium BC until the 7th century AD, although by then the sanctuary had of course acquired a different identity. This continuity in occupation does not of course equate with continuity in cult practices, which actually changed many times over the centuries. The cult of Hermes and Aphrodite at Syme is confirmed for the Iron Age, yet we do not know the name or names of the deities worshipped in the sanctuary in its Minoan phases. The architectural organization of the space changed radically many times from one period to the other. Some 15 different building programs were identified, some on a monumental scale. A large part of the sanctuary was used for animal sacrifices and feasting. Because of this, most of the excavated area was covered by thick layers of black ash and greasy soil, frammed with numerous offerings and ceramics. These accumulated remains were occasionally rearranged to make room for new sacrifices, and it is therefore not surprising that earlier objects were often found right next to later ones. The history of the sanctuary during its 27 centuries of operation closely followed the ebb and flow of the economic, political, and cultural history of Crete. The first phase of prosperity for Syme is dated in the Old-Palatial period, from the 19th through the 18th century BC, and is associated with two spacious successive buildings. The earlier one, marked red on the plan, covered an area of 600 square meters and was of an elaborate construction with paved floors, stone column bases, and other architectural elements made of serpentinite. The size of this building and its construction in a sanctuary that was far away from all known Minoan palatial centers make it unique for the island. When it was destroyed by massive rocks that must have rolled down the northern slope of the mountain, it was immediately replaced by a second structure, shown pink on the plan, also of a monumental scale. Both probably served cultic purposes as well as administration of the sanctuary. The latter is indicated by a clay tablet inscribed in the Cretan hieroglyphic, which seems to record quantities of an unknown product. The date of this second Old-Palatial structure to around 1800 BC is provided by a Camares cup that was trapped in its destruction layer. However, as the sanctuary had already gained prominence, this destruction did not affect its operation for long. At the beginning of the Neo-Palatial period, an immense architectural complex was established at the site. It was comprised by three different parts. An enormous peribolos, light blue on the plan, was built over the destroyed Old-Palatial structures, incorporating a huge rock from the previous destruction. It defines a precinct of about 550 square meters and contains in its center a large orthogonal platform measuring 12 by 7 meters and built with massive stone blocks. Finally, a long paved road with many turns and flights of steps descends from an unknown point outside the excavated area, extending around the peribolos and culminating towards the spring. A built open channel runs next to it to drive the rainwater away. The sophistication, scale, and careful construction of this road and its course in association with the peribolos and platform in the center justify its designation as a processional road. The size and form of the freestanding platform in the center suggest that it was used as a podium where worshippers would have probably stood to attend or perform rituals. The entire complex was covered by a thick layer of sacrificial and other cart remains, all mixed in black soil with charcoal, animal bones, stone vessels, large numbers of votive offerings, and extremely large quantities of pottery. This architectural arrangement is reminiscent of the type known as in the literature as sacred enclosure, which we mainly know from representations in Minoan art. Such sacred enclosures, processional roads, and flat built surfaces, sometimes in combination with other buildings as settings for outdoor cult activities, appear on some Minoan gold signet rings, despite the artistic conventions in producing the space in a miniaturistic style. The same applies to the depiction of a sacred space on the right from Zakros. The proportions, size, and form of the precinct and the structure within it, as well as the rocks incorporated in the built walls shown on the vessel, on this stone vessel, find some correspondence with architectural configurations at Syme. It is of importance for the history of the sanctuary that this monumental Neo-Palatial structure was still used in the Archaic period, when a hearth was established on one of the stone blocks of the podium. At an advanced stage of the late Minoan 1A period, a severe destruction occurred in the sanctuary, probably as a result of an earthquake. The sacred enclosure, the podium, and the processional road were severely damaged. A large building, dark blue on the plan, was then built over parts of them. It was short-lived, however, and was abandoned before the end of the late Minoan 1B. Nevertheless, cult activities continued at the site, as witnessed, for instance, by finds such as the 3 bronze swords of the 15th century, the only ones of their kind to have ever been excavated in a Minoan sanctuary, found in a mixed layer just a few centimeters below topsoil. They were probably discovered accidentally in antiquity already during later building cult activities, building operations, and reburied as sacred relics. Thus, they testify to the fact that Iron Age Cretans often had the opportunity to encounter their Minoan past, especially in places like Syme. At the same time, they signify that some of those who made the pilgrimage to the sanctuary belonged to the upper classes of Minoan society. All 3 weapons come from a bronze workshop whose work can be detected in 12 other swords, 9 of which have been found in tombs around Knossos. The owner of this particular set of swords, probably a Knossian then, would have greatly impressed his contemporaries with the rare gesture of dedicating them at the sanctuary, whose fame seems to have reached as far as this remote palatial center. Although the nature of the rituals performed at Syme during the 2nd millennium is not precisely known, it is certain that the construction of the Old and Neo-Palatial buildings involved a vast expenditure of time and energy, and that the sanctuary attracted large numbers of pilgrims. It is also evident that cult activities required some special equipment, such as large numbers of Minoan ceramic vessels known as communion cups. The abundance of these vases at Syme, their decoration and size, which may reach up to 80 centimeters in height, are without parallels. Their mass production and low quality, as they are made with coarse and poorly fired clay, suggest that they were intended only for temporary use at the sanctuary, after which they were left behind. Their extensive use must have been related to some special rituals, perhaps in association with the water of the spring. The finds from the early 1st millennium testify to a second major period of prosperity at Syme, from the early geometric to the early archaic period. In the proto-geometric or early archaic early geometric period, an altar, green on the plan, was built within the area of the Neo-Palatial enclosure, which continued to be used for cult activities, amplified by the addition of a strong low wall with a step providing easier access. This period saw a spectacular increase in the number of votive offerings, especially of bronzes, including some exceptional ones, such as an early geometric female figurine, which, because of its nudity and the atypical emphasis on the breasts, could be taken to represent Aphrodite or a proto-Aphrodite, and a superb four-sided stand of a Cypriot type, but of Cretan manufacture, also of the 9th century. The growing popularity of the sanctuary in the early Iron Age required some changes in its architectural setting. Extensive building operations are observed at the site around 700 BC, when, for the first time since the Minoan period, the sacred space was modeled on a scale that can be described as monumental. The altar was significantly expanded with the addition of an adjacent square part and a step on its side. This construction formed the core of the open-air cult for the next centuries, in close association with 3 large stepped terraces surrounding it on 3 sides. The terraces, built with packed stones, are bordered by an open built trench, which was presumably channeling the spring water into the sanctuary, perhaps for purification purposes. Their maximum length on their east-west axis is at least 38 meters, and from north to south, 13 meters. Their foundation lies more than 1 meter deep, while the difference in height from one to the other is only about 20 centimeters, following the inclination of the ground, but forming a unified space. The 2 terraces closest to the altar are contemporary with it, whereas the third, southernmost one, was added later, probably in the second half of the 7th century. Their construction created an open area of 650 square meters, responding apparently to a need to accommodate large numbers of worshippers during rituals. Immediately to the north of the terraces lie the remnants of the Neo-Palatial complex, which, although partially destroyed, still offered large surfaces for use. This area can therefore be counted in the use-up space, bringing the total surface around the altar to approximately 1,200 square meters. Even outside Crete, and despite the reorganization of sacred spaces on a monumental scale in several parts of the Aegean from the 8th and 7th centuries, no comparable architectural arrangement in form or size has been documented. The surface of the 3 terraces was covered by a thick layer of sacrificial remains, in places reaching a depth of 1 meter and 80 centimeters, which contained large numbers of votives, animal bones and horns, charcoal, ashes, and virtually inexhaustive quantities of pottery. An essential difference between the Minoan buildings and the archaic terraces of Syme must be emphasized here. Although the Neo-Palatial complex was also an open-air structure, it was surrounded by a massive enclosure, suggesting a limited access to the precinct. In contrast, the area of the terraces was completely open, and access to it must have been unrestricted in the Archaic period, perhaps reflecting a system of wide participation by the worshippers. The combined surface of the Archaic terraces and the Minoan sacred enclosure was used at least until the 5th century, when a profound break in cult practices occurred in the sanctuary. Whereas in the previous centuries, worship was practiced in the open air, in the classical and Hellenistic period, roofed constructions reappeared at the site for the first time after the Old-Palatial period. In the 3rd century BC, for instance, an oikos temple with a high bench at the back, a type with a long history in Crete, was erected in the vicinity of the spring. It was in use until the 3rd century AD, having been rebuilt and repaired several times. One of these reconstructions is recorded in an inscription of about 200 AD, mentioning a certain Nicanor, son of Theomnastos, who dedicated the temple to Hermes Kedrites, that is, Hermes of the cedar trees. In other words, a Hermes related to vegetation. In close association with these transformations in cult, and already from the end of the 7th century, some other changes can be observed in dedication practices. The numbers and quality of the votive offerings gradually decline, indicating that from this point, the interest of the Cretan cities in this sanctuary was starting to fade away. It is in this period that Cretan cities exhibit a new tendency for the monumentalization of the sacred space located within their towns or in close vicinity, rather than investing in extra urban sanctuaries like Syme. This behavior gradually diminished the popularity of the individual sanctuaries, again like Syme, which, however, continued to attract pilgrims until late Roman times. The erection of 2 small, successive, early Christian churches, the last of which was in use until the 7th century AD, introduced the final phases of the site, this time in a complete break with the earlier religious tradition. The long use through the 2nd and 1st millennia and the monumentality of the buildings, the extensive scale of sacrifices, the abundance of votives, and the emphasis on the accommodation of large crowds of pilgrims indicate that the sanctuary of Syme, located far away from the prosperous urban centers of the island, cannot have been founded or controlled by a single city. The construction of the immense old and Neo-Palatial buildings or of the extensive archaic terraces in a mountainous location that was inaccessible in winter time would have required a major investment and the involvement of more than one community. Such a collective mobilization for the monumentalization of the sacred space would imply the operation of political institutions that allowed for decision-making at an interregional level already from the early 7th century BC. We're talking about the terraces here. In fact, some of the pilgrims who visited the sanctuary commemorating the event by engraving their names and places of origin on fragments of Hellenistic tiles, attesting that they came from various Cretan cities. An inscription of the 6th century mentions the venerable citizen Aeschylus, who came from the town of Arcades, a town to the west of the sanctuary, to honor Hermes Kedrites. Other inscriptions provide the names of worshippers who came to Syme and call them synodiporeondes, that is, those who walk to the sanctuary in companies, again from different cities, some at a distance from Syme, such as Priansos, Hierapetra, Litos, Knossos, and Tilissos. The interregional status of Syme is also attested by the votive offerings, especially by the anthropomorphic and zoomorphic figurines, which represent different regional styles. After all, the individuals who dedicated the 588 bronze animal figurines of the geometric and archaic periods who excavated at Syme cannot possibly have all come from a Syme community. This number, 588, is actually the largest ever found in a Greek sanctuary, with the sole exception of Olympia. Two things must be highlighted here with regard to the dedication practices at Syme. The first is related to the social status of the dedicants. The diachronic presence of elite circles in the sanctuary can be deduced from the prestigious votive offerings, such as this gold signet ring showing a runner, or the bronze figurines of adorants from the Minoan period. From the Iron Age, costly offerings include the bronze four-sided stand of the 9th century and a 7th century scepter finial with a lion figure made in silver and gold. On the other hand, Syme has also provided much humbler offerings, such as anthropomorphic and animal figurines in clay, indicating that the sanctuary would have been open to other social classes as well. Bronzes appear in general to have been the privilege of restricted groups of people, as they are found in large quantities only in a very few sanctuaries, such as the Idaean cave and Syme, while they are rare or completely absent in others where terracottas predominate, such as at Gortyn and elsewhere. This reveals a clear differentiation in the choices made by the dedicants, depending on the sanctuaries they visited, but certainly also on their social status. Their gender was also important for this matter. In Syme, metal objects were mostly associated with men, as implied by the almost complete absence of female figures from the iconography of the excavated bronzes. The presence of women becomes noticeable in the sanctuary from the 7th century, and then exclusively in clay figurines and relief plaques. The second important point concerns the changes in the dedication practices at Syme through the centuries. Even if certain cult practices, such as sacrifices, remained practically the same from the Bronze to the Iron Age, others, such as the prevalence of certain types of votives, did change to a great extent. The large quantities of animal bones and cooking pots, as well as the large amounts of ceramic and stone vessels from the Minoan times, mainly cups and goblets found within the sacred enclosure, reveal an emphasis on commensality and show that the pilgrims of the second millennium communicated with the divine not through personal offerings, but in collective rituals such as sacrifices, libations, and feasting, and by consistently offering the same types of votives. A characteristic case are the Minoan stone offering tables, some inscribed with linear A inscriptions, which number more than 1,200 examples. For purposes of comparison, the second largest corpus of such artifacts comes from the sanctuary of Euctas on Crete and numbers only, if I may say so, although this is a very large numbers actually, so the numbers only 260 examples. In the first millennium, a profound transformation of cult and dedication practices took place. The numbers of stone and ceramic vessels decreased dramatically, whereas the numbers of clay and bronze finds gradually increase. Various new types of metal dedications appear, such as bronze tripod cauldrons that you see here, rod tripods and four-sided stands, vessels and shields with pictorial decoration in relief, and many others. Their numbers, quality, and typological diversity reach a peak from the 9th through the 7th centuries. Some of these types are represented by the dozens and others by the hundreds, whereas there are also some unique finds, such as a bronze sistrum and a bronze horse frontlet. The bronze anthropomorphic statuettes in particular, which during the second millennium counted only a few examples, without much typological variety, show an explosion of types and subjects. Their intricate and diverse iconography show a more individuated way of approaching the divine. To illustrate this point, only 3 superb statuettes of the 7th century will be shown here: a centaur, an archer, and a small kouros. Bronze votive offerings have been found in several other Cretan sanctuaries. None, however, has provided such a large and diverse corpus of metal dedications, with the sole exception of the Idaean cave. Even this site, however, the Idaean cave, has yielded fewer offerings than Syme in certain types. For instance, and as already mentioned, Syme has delivered 588 bronze animal figurines, as well as 41 bronze anthropomorphic statuettes. The Idaean cave has produced 65 bronze animal figurines and only 12 anthropomorphic ones. For another comparison, the Psychro cave, also known for its long use, yielded a total of 20 bronze figurines of humans and animals. Another remarkable class of bronze votive offerings from Syme are the miniature shields of the Archaic and Classical periods, which probably refer in an abstract way to the warrior status of their dedicants. Although such objects are found in other Cretan and Greek sanctuaries, nowhere do they reach close to the impressive number of 500 exams that Syme has delivered. For a comparison again, the Idaean cave has yielded only 30 such examples, the sanctuary of Aphrodite in Miletus about 70, and the Heraion of Samos just 40. This preponderance must be related to the cult and deities venerated at Syme. The cult of Hermes and Aphrodite at Syme is epigraphically attested on votives dating from the Archaic to the Roman period. The cultic epithet Kevritis, for Hermes in particular, appears on graffiti on tile fragments, sherds, and stone inscriptions from the Hellenistic period. Iconographic evidence further testifies to the worship of the 2 deities in the sanctuary at least from the 10th century BC, while some votives, which are rare or unknown in other sacred places, shed light on the cult practices of Syme. Only 2 groups of offerings will be isolated here, as they serve to illustrate the beliefs and aspirations of those who visited Syme. The first is a corpus of about 100 bronze cut-out plaques with pictorial decoration in low relief, dating from the early 7th to the early 5th century BC. They were originally attached on wooden boards and hung on trees, as attested from written sources and iconographic evidence. This is corroborated by the epithet Kevritis and the graffiti on a tile fragment from Syme, which preserves the phrase Idrisa Kevris, meaning I have found it on cedar trees. Similar finds are scarce beyond Syme. Their consistent dedication here suggests that their representations are directly related to the cult practices of this particular sanctuary. The representations record the stages that precede and follow the sacrifice. The majority depict hunters shooting arrows or capturing their prey with bare hands, mainly goats, sacred animals in Cretan religion from Minoan times. Others show hunters carrying the wounded prey to the place of sacrifice, or only the head of an already slaughtered animal. These practices are confirmed by the god skulls found in the layers of sacrificial pyres at Syme. Hermes himself makes his appearance on some of these bronzes. Certain aspects of his divine personality and iconography, as worshipped at Syme, correspond to the Pan-Hellenic perception of the deity. This is evident, for instance, on a 5th century example showing him with his established symbol, the Kyrikion. Other examples, however, reveal some unexpected features of his divine character, which seem to be remnants of Minoan religious beliefs. Such is, for instance, the association of the deity with hunting, which is unknown in the rest of the Greek world, and with wild nature, trees, and vegetation. The mixture of the two religious traditions is epitomized on a 6th century bronze plaque, which portrays Hermes just like his mortal worshippers, that is, as an archer in the hand, but with the exceptional feature of 3 branches springing out of his head. On the same image, however, the established Greek iconography of Hermes makes its presence in his winged sandals. The 3 branches certainly hint at his relationship with vegetation, also evident in his evocation as Hedritis. A similar concept is manifested on the 7th century bronze plaque from Syme, showing a male figure with his face frontally depicted, most probably Hermes himself, sitting on the branches of a tree in divine epiphany, which seems to evoke the Minoan perception of tree cult and epiphany. In ancient Greek religion, Hermes is the predominant god of boundaries, transitions, and passages, helping those in perilous wanderings in unknown territories, real or symbolic ones. In this capacity, he is also identified as psychopompos, leading the dead to the ultimate passage. He is also present at the ascents of the Chthonian deities, such as Demeter and Kore, from the earth. The powers of Hermes extended to the protection and guidance of young people until they reach maturity, one of the most important transitions in life. Many myths and images illustrate his concern for the coming of age of the young. For instance, he is often shown bringing children such as Dionysus, Asclepius, and Hercules to send Chiron, the renowned mentor, away from the cities and up to the mountains to be brought up. The Cretan and Panhellenic perceptions of Hermes converge on images like this, showing the god watching a young man maneuvering a caprit into a sacred space. The iconographic and epigraphic evidence from Syme documents that for a large part of its history, and at least from the early 1st millennium BC, the sanctuary functioned as a center of coming-of-age rituals for the Cretan youth. The worship of the 2 deities in the scheme of a divine couple indicates that these rituals were addressed to both boys and girls. Maturation was a matter of great concern to ancient Greeks, who associated it with institutions, placed it under the jurisdiction of the gods, and established rituals and cults to mark and celebrate it. Modern research calls these rituals rites of passage and maturation or initiation rituals, although these terms are not synonymous. The purpose of rites of passage was to mark a radical transformation in the social status of the individuals as they came of age. For boys, the desired transformation was their elevation to the status of a citizen and a warrior. For girls, the result was the assumption of the role of a wife and mother. The intersection of these stages of life for both men and women was marriage. The bronze cutout plaques and other finds from Syme supply iconographic evidence for the cult activities in this sanctuary and lend some archaeological support to the reports of Ephorus, the ancient historian of the 4th century BC, handed down to us by Strabo. The account of Ephorus and some other epigraphic and textual evidence explicates the system of education for young Cretans, aiming at their intellectual and military training, after which they could enter the ranks of citizens in their city-states. This process was based on institutions strictly controlled by the state and sanctified by religion. According to our sources, in a first stage of this system, young boys, perhaps at the age of 7, were removed from their mother's protection and introduced to the world of men, specifically to the Andrion, the building of the Cretan cities where citizens gathered to feast and tell stories of past acts of bravery. The boys' upbringing was overseen by a pedonomos, a supervisor, who taught them grammar and music and led them in mock battles. In a second stage, the adolescents, now about 15 years old, organized themselves in groups called agelle, or herds, while continuing their training in fighting and hunting. Part of this training was a staged war between the boys and the prominent citizen who had selected a young boy from the herd who stood out in every respect. This citizen, called Philitor in our sources, virtually kidnapped the young boy, called Eromenos, and presented him in the Andrion. Next, the Philitor, the Eromenos, and the other members of the herd left the city and lived for 2 months in the wilderness up on the mountains, where the young men exercised in hunting. When this company returned to the city, the young boy who had been nominally abducted, now called Parastathis, the attendant one, received costly gifts from his mentor, that is, an armor as a symbol of his manly age and warrior status, a cup referring to his ability to attend the banquets in the Andrion, and an ox for sacrifice. In turn, he offered a feast to his companions. Not all adolescents achieved this status, as this was reserved only for the best amongst the aristocratic families. According to Ephorus, these new citizens retained for life the designation klinos, the glorious one, and held a place of honor at public festivals and athletic contests. They also distinguished themselves by their luxurious garments, which they had also received as a gift. Strabo tells us that this educational system was maintained until the Hellenistic period, but was abolished when the island was conquered by the Romans. This institutional framework for the education of young Cretans finds some correspondence in finds from Syme. The iconographic emphasis on young men as hunters on the bronze cutout plaques reflects the main activity of young Cretans during their 2 months isolation and education on the mountains. The successful outcome of such training is related in a number of cutout plaques which show the capture and sacrifice of the elusive wild animals of the Cretan countryside. The clear differentiation between young and mature men in some votives seems to correspond to the relationship between the young Eromenos and the mature Philitor. The elaborate garments of some figures from Syme also recall the gift that young men received from their mentors, while the gift of the cup mentioned in the sources is commemorated by an 8th century bronze figurine of a cupbearer. The gift of armor is implied by the figurines of armored warriors and perhaps also by the miniature shields from Syme. The concept of the relationship between mature and young men participating in coming-of-age rituals is implicit in an 8th century bronze group from the sanctuary showing 2 epiphalic figures standing on a common base. Their unequal height differentiates them into an adult and a young man, linked together with a gesture that could refer to a staged presentation of the younger one, perhaps in the Andrion, as we saw before. In the 7th century, another Cretan artist depicted 2 hunters of different age facing each other on a bronze cutout plaque of unknown origin, now in Louvre, but perhaps from Syme. Similar representations with pronounced sexual overtones are often shown on Attic vases. In the Cretan representations, however, even if the erotic aspect is of course present, the emphasis lies on the institutional and cultic context, since the animal on the shoulders of the young man is not the lover's offering to the mature man, but the captured animal to be sacrificed. The perception of Hermes as the protector of the young and his depiction as a mature bearded hunter on another bronze plaque identifies the god himself as a philetor and highlights the religious associations of the institutions relating to maturation. Although doubts have been expressed as to whether the accounts of Ephorus and Strabo reflect actual coming-of-age rituals celebrated in Cretan sanctuaries, the material from Syme makes perfect sense in this context. In any event, the aristocratic occupation with hunting, the luxurious garments, and the expensive material and high quality of these votives indicate that their dedicants came from the upper social class. Another important class of votive offerings from Syme, which also reflects the interest of the worshippers in maturation, are the about 80 small bronze plates of the Archaic and Classical period, showing garments of rather textiles, which would also have been suspended on trees. Only 2 examples reproduce the actual form of a cloth, a tunic, and a garment with thick folds. The others merely show textiles that would take the shape of a cloth when wrapped around the body, as was the artistic norm. The importance of garments in ancient Greek religion and their dedication to various deities is well documented in the epigraphic and archaeological records, such as on a marble relief from Central Greece showing garments hanging from a rope, including one that looks very much like a bronze example from Syme. Because of their direct relationship with the body, garments often carry special symbolisms, as they can be indicative of gender, social status, and wealth, but also of age, especially with regard to the transition from childhood to adulthood. For this reason, they play an important role in myths and cults related to maturation and the integration of young people into the social fabric of the city. On Crete in particular, various inscriptions and ancient texts allude to the role of clothing in this integration. One Cretan festival even bears a name that directly refers to clothing. This is the Ekdisia, that is the disrobing festival of Festus, which we hear in association with the myth of the transformation of a girl who, through the intervention of the local deity Lito Phitia, sheds her peplos and transforms into a boy in order to marry. The motive of discarding the female clothes and that conceal a male body and the achievement of manhood appears in other myths, such as that of Achilles in Skyros, who casts his female clothes before Odysseus and assumes his weapons, marking his passage from adolescence to maturity. Some Hellenistic inscriptions from Dreros, Litos, and elsewhere, referring to young men who take the oath of citizens upon leaving their hearth, establish a link between the education system described by Ephorus and the myths alluding to the rejection of boyish attire. These young men are called ekdiomeni, that is the ones disrobing themselves, and azosti, that is the ones who do not bear any arms. There is an obvious connection between arms and clothes here, and it seems that the boys, in the final stage of their introduction to manhood, took up their weapons only after they had divested themselves of their youthful attire, as perhaps was also done in the disrobing festival of Festus. Similarly, the young men of Litos acquired new garments after taking the city's oath at the festival bearing the telling name of Perivlimata or Perivlimiea, that is the attiring festival. It seems therefore that in various Cretan cities, the condition for entering the status of a citizen and warrior was associated with the dramatized act of dressing or undressing. The phenomenon was not unknown in the rest of the Greek world. A festival with a revealing name, enzymatia, was celebrated at Argos, where the young people removed their enthymata, their clothes, to wear new ones, while a similar demonstration took place at a festival in Arcadia called apodixis, manifestations, where young boys stripped from their clothes to prove their valor and prowess in front of the gathered citizens. Then came marriage, an indispensable part of the passage into adulthood. According to our sources, marriage was on Crete part of the coming of age rituals, as boys were married in groups upon leaving their herd. The mixing of Hermes and Aphrodite at Syme is no doubt done under the scheme of a sacred marriage, although this is not one of the most common pairings in Greek mythology. The matching of the two deities is not absent in the sources, nor in some other sanctuaries on and beyond Crete, such as in Myrtos near Syme, but also in Argos and Samos. Athens also housed the common cult of Hermes Psythiristis, that is Hermes the Whisperer, Aphrodite, and Eros Psythirus. Whispers are probably meant here with erotic connotations. The divine couplet is also iconographically attested, such as in this depiction of Hermes whipping the earth to cause Aphrodite's ascent, and in consequence, fruition, which reveals an aspect of fertility in their union. The couple is also eminent in the Greek colony of Epizephirian Locri, with an obvious emphasis on the erotic aspects of Aphrodite and the enthephalic Hermes, a feature that we already know from the Hermaic stele. 5th century clay plaques from the sanctuary of Persephone show the temple and the couple's carved statues at the Epizephirian Locri, while a boy and a girl offer libations at an adjacent altar. It must be stressed, however, that this particular divine mixing was associated with sexual maturation before the actual wedding. We must remember that in Greek mythology, Hermes and Aphrodite were not just a couple, they were an illegal couple, not sanctioned by marriage. In any event, the sanctuary of Syme offers the earliest attestation of this sacred couple, which offered divine protection to Cretan boys and girls in their transition to sexual maturity just before marriage. Hellenistic graffiti from the sanctuary actually mentions some female names accompanied by the adjective kala, the beautiful one, which is used to denote girls of marriageable age. To sum up, the name of the maturation ritual celebrated at Syme is not known. The spacious cult installations, the intensive and continuous worship for centuries, the monumental character of the buildings, certainly testified to the popularity of the sanctuary over the millennia. Its attraction was undoubtedly related to the rituals taking place there in association with the maturation of young Cretans. We do not know whether the prominence of the sanctuary in the Minoan period was related to any similar rituals, nor whether the divine couple of Hermes and Aphrodite are to be traced back to the Bronze Age, since the relevant iconographic evidence of the second millennium from the sanctuary itself is rare. In any event, the antiquity of the sacred place would have been evident to the pilgrims of the first millennium through the massive ruined buildings and the antique votive offerings that would occasionally come to the surface during the rearrangements of the sacrificial remains. The eminence of the sanctuary was also due to the fact that it was open not only to many Cretan civic centers, but also to many different social groups, regardless of gender, age, and class. For centuries, rich and less privileged worshippers, men and women of various ages and from different cities from Central and Eastern Crete, made the pilgrimage and offered votives, sacrifices, and libations to ensure the well-being of their youth and of their communities. I hope that the glimpse of the Libyan Sea from the sanctuary of Syme will be a reward for your patience to follow its long history. Thank you very much for your attention.
We thank you very much, Giorgo, for such a rich, systematic and insightful lecture. It was really an impressive presentation of this interregional and diachronically used sanctuary. I hope that there will be many questions by scholars. You could, Giorgo, could you please stop